Good afternoon. Welcome to App Development with Components, Part 3. In this part, we'll be focusing on the user experience and how you can build user experience into your app. My name is Matt Driscoll. I'm a software engineer at Esri, and I work on the Calcite Design System, building components, as well as the Maps SDK for JavaScript. Co-presenting with me is Ryan Liebed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Liebed. I'm a software engineer here at Esri. I work on the ArcGIS online team, primarily focused on instant apps. I've contributed to the instant apps configuration, built a handful of instant apps, as well as built out instant apps components, which is a shared component library that we use across the suite of instant apps.
Thanks, Ryan. And then moderating the live stream for us is Julie Powell. Julie.
Hi, everybody. I'm a product manager for JavaScript SDK and Calcite, and I help with open source libraries.
Awesome, thanks. I'd like to welcome all the live stream viewers. Julie will be happy to answer questions on the live stream, and then we'll maybe have some time to answer a couple of them at the end. A quick reminder to please share your feedback in the app. Helps us get better and deliver better content to you. So the agenda for this session, we'll be talking about how to build the UX into your web app, and we'll be focusing on using the Calcite Design System to do that, as well as the Maps SDK for JavaScript. We're going to explore some example apps where we take both those components and put them together and build sample apps. And then at the end, we'll have some resources for further information on how to do that. And then we'll answer some questions. So first, I just want to give a quick overview of the Calcite Design System. So the point of the Calcite Design System is to help you build user-friendly, accessible, responsive, and consistent applications. And in order to do that, we provide a Figma web UI kit, so you can have access to all the designs of the components in their design state. We also provide a library of icons, both user interface and point symbols for a map, and there's hundreds of these icons that you can use to build your application. We also obviously include web components that are ready to use. You can just throw into an app using custom elements and start building. And then all of this is with accessibility in mind, so it follows the web content accessibility guidelines and supporting things like reduced motion, high contrast colors, keyboard navigation in all the components, and a lot more. We also offer something called design tokens, which will allow you to customize branding, color, modes, scale fonts, and a bunch of other variables that you can tweak to get an app looking how you want it. And then we include a bunch of design guidelines, best practices, tutorials, and a component sample playground where you can essentially build the component the way you like it and then just throw it in your app. So in order to build powerful user experience, we're going to focus on application layout and structure. So we're going to mainly work with components that allow you to lay out your app and kind of house your data and your content. Things like an application shell, a flow, or a drill-in, panels, a sheet or a drawer, dialogues and popovers. And then we're going to talk a little bit about choosing the right component for the job. So there's things like popover versus tooltip, sheet versus dialogue, and a bunch of others, and we can kind of go through like when one is better than the other to use in your app. And then we'll cover how you can customize your app and components using both the light and dark modes, as well as using design tokens to brand an app for your specific needs or your company. So this is the shell component. I wanted to have a little diagram for this one because it's pretty key in a lot of our demos. So what it does is like a frame for your application where you can put different slots of content like header and footer, side panels, top panels, and then throw your map in there and it'll go into the middle by default. But you could put any other content in there and it just goes right in the center. And all of these slots are optional, but they allow you to configure an application to kind of fit your needs and your workflow. Let's talk a little bit about Calcite Design System tokens. So I like to think of them as like the building blocks of the user interface elements, kind of like design DNA. So they point to values for colors, fonts, spacing, borders, rounded corners. All of these are set in variables that you can tweak and adjust the application to match your needs. So because all the components use these design system tokens, there's a lot of consistency throughout the user interface. It helps designers and developers speak the same language, so we're both referencing the same variable and talking about the same thing, and allows for a great deal of customization. So in this customization bullet point I have, you can customize a specific component with certain tokens that we have. For example, this one's showing a token allowing you to customize the border color of an accordion. So that's the first route you could go in the highest level. Next, you may want to just customize the border color for every component, and you could do that with a design token variable. And then if you want to change that color for everything in your application, the low-level values, there's a color that you could change as well. So there's kind of 3 different tiers that you'd go through to kind of customize components or your application. So here's an example. If I wanted to customize an app to change the brand color to be more of a purple-like color, I could use the root selector, which basically sets everything on the HTML, to use this new brand color, brand hover, press, and underline. And then on the right, I have an example where I may just want to customize an individual component or all the components, all the dialog components in your app. So in the first one, if I target the Calcite dialog and change the dialog's background color, that'll change the color for every dialog in that page. But if I wanted to just override a specific dialog and change the background color, I could give it a class and then change the token for that specific class, and it'll just affect that one individual component. So let's do a little bit of a tour of Calcite and show off some of these components. So the first one I wanted to just point out was the accordion. They're most often used for hiding and showing sections of content. And they can have different selection modes where users can have one open or multiple open. And we get some kind of usage guidelines, to organize related text-based information, to shorten pages, reduce scrolling when content is not crucial to read in full. And you can kind of see an example. And then I can configure properties. Maybe I want the icon to be at the start instead of the end. Maybe I want a different icon to like the plus, minus icons. There's modes. And all these kind of different properties that you can adjust to configure this to work how you want it. And then I could just grab the HTML from here or just automatically copy it and throw it in my app. You can also see the different slots in the accordion item. And then if I want to change like a background color, I could do that. So this is kind of how the design tokens work. I can override existing tokens. And then we kind of see the events here. So we see best practices. I wanted to bring up the accordion because it's really similar to another component that we have called a block. So it kind of shows you when would be a good choice to use a block and when would be a good choice to use an accordion. Accordions are not intended to use within a Calcite panel, where blocks are made more for that. Accordion is best suited for containing narrative or text-heavy content. If you have like controls that are interactive, it's better to use a block and put those in a panel. Then we go into accessibility support, what keys do what for this component. These are all the properties that we kind of tweaked in the playground, and then the slots and the styles. So here's a similar block component, and I can show a different sample with multiple of them. You can kind of see how they look just slightly different, but they're more designed to house like controls, and you'll see this a lot in the map viewer if you've used it. Here's the shell component. So this one's pretty key for building our applications. It's basically this frame around all this content, and we're slotting in panels in this example. I can go to the slots and say, okay, this is the start panel. This is the end panel where I just have this action bar. So kind of this little control kind of shows you where the slots go, and it's nice to highlight and see what's going on there. But yeah, the shell is it's used for a full page experience, given a defined width and height, enabled to embed applications and experiences and other narrative content. So we'll be using that in some of our examples. Another one is a sheet. You can kind of think of it as a drawer as well. So when you open it, and it kind of is like a modal dialog that goes to one of the sides. And you can configure it to go in different areas and float rather than be attached to the side. So maybe in a more of a mobile experience, I might want to use block end and throw some different content in here when the screen size gets too small. And that way I could easily access it with my thumbs because it's at the bottom there. So it can be used pretty well for responsive design if you have panels, but then you want to transition them into sheets as the device size gets smaller. Dialog is another one that's good for storing content. So you can see that it's responsive by default. It'll open to the available space given. If I close that panel, now I got it in the corner here. And then you can kind of see what the usage guidelines are for it. Focused workflows, tasks, prompts, engaging users with onboarding or instructional content, interrupting the workflow to present a choice. So those are all things that are good for the dialog component. Popover is another one. It's good for secondary workflow, descriptions of content, a few contextual actions. Here's an example of that. Maybe you have a simple button that you want to just have hidden away there, some messaging. Flow is another great one for organizing content. So in this example, there's a list of items here. And what I can do is I can drill down into them and even go to a third level deep and then go back. So this is good for drilling into data if you have some kind of a workflow. And we use this a lot in the map viewer as well to kind of configure settings and drill down deep into deeper levels of settings. So there's a ton of other components you can use. Check them out here. I just wanted to highlight a few of them that are really good for laying out content and to use in your apps. We also have tons of icons, as I mentioned. So these are all the user interface icons. I can search for things like maybe I need an arrow component or arrow icon. There's tons of arrows. Maybe I need like a tree, there's a tree. There's also a bunch of point symbols. So you could use these for, showing data on your map. So yeah, there's tons of those and they're all categorized as well. So I want to talk a little bit about theming and the colors. So Calcite does have a light and a dark mode. And by default, these have colors assigned to those. So this is our brand color and our background color. And this is the same for the dark mode brand and background color. And there's all kinds of state colors, usage guidelines. Here's all the colors for the different modes. So if you want to just tweak a mode, you could see what colors are here and tweak those. And it shows some best practices on how you can use these in your application. And then we have a reference to all the tokens that we can override. So I mentioned the background a little bit. There's foreground ones as well. There's things for borders. Like maybe I want the borders to be thicker in the application. Maybe I want the rounded corners to be a little more rounded or less rounded. I can change things like shadow, font. So all these things can be changed by modifying these token variables in CSS. And we also have a bunch of other tutorials on the Calcite Design System documentation. So there's a section for tutorials that you can go through and create a mapping app, build a dark switch mode, and construct a mapping app with web components. So those are great resources if you want to investigate a little more. All right, that's the end of the Calcite tour. Now we're going to talk a bit about the Maps SDK components, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Cool. Julie, can you switch over to 3, please? Cool, thanks. All right, cool. Well, thanks, Matt. So now that we've discussed using the Calcite Design System for user experience, alongside that, you'll of course want to include web mapping functionality, and you can do that pretty easily with ArcGIS Maps SDK components. So let's talk through some of the components that are available. So there are various web component libraries under the Maps SDK, such as Maps, Charts, Coding, and Embeddable. So let's go ahead and walk through some of these components here. So on the doc page, you'll have your map components. So this will include components such as your map or your scene, and you'll notice that you can easily include it through a tag here, directly in your HTML, or if you're using like a React framework. Oh. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Seconds. Looks like my display is not showing.
You can exit the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so I exited the PowerPoint.
Or them into the presentation.
Is it on 3?
It's on 3, yeah. It's seeing, I think we're seeing that right now.
Okay. 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
You can change the display setting.
There you go.
All right.
It's on the wrong window now.
Yeah.
Oh, go back to settings and. Displays.
Okay.
And then, not,
Mirror for this.
yeah, mirror. Yeah, there you go.
All right. And
There you go.
all right.
Is that showing? All right. Thanks,
All right.
Thanks for your patience.
Sorry about that, guys. All right, cool. All right, so now let's talk through the different map component libraries. So for map components, this is all the components and functionality ported over as web components. So you can easily include mapping functionality through HTML tags. So you can directly add them in your HTML files, or you can add them into directly into your something like a React app, as what was probably mentioned in part 2, by using the ArcGIS Map tag. And you can easily add in a map by using the item ID attribute and using an ID of a web map item that was saved in the portal. So next thing is going to be the charts components. They're currently in beta, but the charts components contain a series of components that can be used to build charts. So charts components can be authored directly in the map viewer. So in the map viewer, if you have a web map, and within the feature layer, you can author a chart, and in that chart, the chart will be stored within the feature layer in the web map. And in your app, you can reference the web map through an item ID, and from there you can access the chart data. Coding components, we're not going to go into too much detail with coding components, but just wanted to briefly mention it here. If you're looking to have your end users create arcade expressions by using the arcade editor component, you can add them in here. And also embeddable components as well. This is a component where you can easily embed a map component with some pre-configured properties, such as adding in a heading, a legend, and some pretty simple UI. All right. Cool. So now let's talk about the map components a little bit more. So as I mentioned earlier, they're ready-to-use components for developing web map applications with minimal coding effort, as you have seen with the documentation. So you'll see in the upcoming demos how easy it is to set up web mapping functionality with these components. One thing to highlight is that initially map components were created by wrapping the widgets, and all the widgets available in the core API are now available as web components. And now the team is updating the wrapped components into web components, which will allow developers to fully use the web components features such as encapsulation, slots, and design tokens. So I have a couple graphics here on using the Maps SDK components. So if you focus your attention on the left, pretty simple. This is an example on how to get a map rendered with the zoom tool and the legend tool. You'll see that there's the ArcGIS map tag with the item ID attribute set to an ID. And in there you have both the zoom and the legend nested with the positioning set with the attributes. And now if you want to render out a map component outside of the map, if you focus your attention on the right, you can do that by using an ID and the reference element attribute. So on the right side, I have a Calcite shell. At the second child of the shell, I have ArcGIS Map. I have an ID set to ArcGIS Map with the item ID and the zoom. But the sibling right above it, the Calcite shell panel, is slotted at the panel start. I have ArcGIS Legend, and for the reference element, I'm setting it to the ID of the map. And setting the reference element to the ID of the map will give the legend a reference to the map, and it'll have access to everything that it needs to render the map data correctly. All right, so now I just wanted to talk through a little bit more of the different map components that are available in the Maps SDK. So same thing as the map, we have the scene that's available. So same sort of idea, set the item ID. You have your different properties if you want to set a different viewpoint. So we have properties available for setting camera positioning, header, tilt. And if I go down to the different properties here, we have different properties that are available that if you'll need to access like the different layer views, again, if you need to set the camera, so the names of the properties, and if you look at the second column here for the attributes, you'll notice that there are some empty columns and some filled columns. So for example, if we look at alpha compositioning enabled, you'll be able to set this directly in your HTML. For other attributes that have it empty, you would just need to get a reference to the DOM element and set it via like dot notation. Or if you're using a React framework, you can also set the attribute directly in your JSX. Cool. So here's the legend component. Pretty simple. Has the map, has the legend, sets the positioning to the bottom right. And as I'm walking through this, you'll notice that the widgets that were all available in the core API are all available as map components. Same thing with search. If you want to add in search, you can add that here. And if you have search sources that are pre-configured, or if you need to set search sources on the search component, you can get a reference to ArcGIS search. You can access the sources property and set the sources directly on the search component node. So next thing, what is that? So next thing is the expand component. So if you want to have a component that's hidden behind an expand to show and hide, you can use the expand component. But one thing I wanted to note here is the ArcGIS placement component. So now if you want to render like some sort of custom user interface, you'd use the placement component. So in this example, you'll see that there's the map, you have an expand, and you'll have a placement component. And inside that placement component, you'll have the Calcite button. If you want to render out some custom UI using maybe some components from Calcite, like Calcite carousel and various Calcite items, since it's not a pre-built map component, you'll use the placement component, and that'll help render out your custom UI. So in this case, it'll just be a Calcite button here. Cool. So the next component library that I want to talk about under the Maps SDK are the charts components. And the reason I'm talking about them today is because they'll be used in the upcoming demo, and you'll see how easily that they can be implemented into your web app. So the charts components is a series of components that can be used to render charts. There's 8 different chart types available. So that's your bar charts, your histogram charts, scatter plots, pie charts, box plots, and they'll all be available on the documentation. And they're rendered through an item ID of the web map in your web app. And the way that your web app will render the chart is it'll render out the chart through a reference of a JSON object, which will follow the chart's component specification. So earlier I mentioned that if you have a web map, that contains a feature layer and has a chart authored in it, your web app will be able to access that chart JSON object and use that to render out the chart with the chart component. So I have a simple graphic here on how to do that. So I have a reference to the map, I have a reference to the chart, and I have some logic to look for layers, to look for the chart layer. So map.alt layers find, so an ID of chart layer. I'll be setting the view with the map on the chart element. I'll be setting the layer as well as the model. And the model is the JSON object representation of the chart. So in this case, it will be in the chart layer, accessing it through the charts property. The charts will be an array of objects, and I'm accessing the first object. Cool. So now that we've talked about the different map components, or the components in the Maps SDK, I'll now be handing it over to Matt on talking about designing and building apps.
Thanks, Ryan. Julie, can you switch me over to 5? Thanks. All right, thanks, Ryan. So now we can talk about actually designing and building these apps. So basically what we're going to do next is we're going to put all this together, use the components from the Calcite Design System, as well as the Maps SDK from JavaScript, and we're going to build a few user experiences using common layouts and patterns. And we'll introduce a little bit of responsive design as well. And then we'll go into applying some customization using design tokens to kind of tweak the branding of one of the apps. So let's jump into building user experience. So here's a sample app I've created, and this uses a web map of grocery access in the United States. So these are block groups, and if I click on one of them, I can see the number of grocery stores within walking and driving distance. And here's my app. I've got this Calcite shell frame around where I slot in a navigation component. You can see here, slotted into the header of my shell. And then within that panel here on the left, I have a legend just showing the map. And then up here in the top corner, I have a Calcite action button to toggle between light and dark mode of my application. So I click that, it's going to go into dark mode. And what this is doing is basically just changing a class on the body of the document. And it also switches out some classes within the ArcGIS Maps component. And it toggles the Maps SDK style sheets from light and dark theme. So in this app, I have both the light and the dark, but one's disabled, and then it basically just toggles one on and off. So let's look at the HTML for this. And before that, I'll just kind of inspect the DOM and show you how the shell is structured. So if I go into the frame here, here's my shell component. You can see that's taking up the whole HTML area there, and that's because I have this margin of 0 and height of 100%. And then I'm just setting the starting panel to not have a border at the top here, so it's not this double border. And that's all the styles I have there. So within my shell, I have my navigation component there at the top. And I got my logo where I'm setting an icon using one of those Calcite icons to the shopping cart in this scenario because it's grocery stores. And then I have my heading and my description right there just to go below it. And then within that, I have my action here on the right top corner. I've also placed a tooltip. And the way the tooltip works is it uses a reference element property to get the ID from this action, and that's how it links them together and positions it. That's where you see that little tooltip. And then I have my shell panel here on the left, and within that I have a Calcite panel, and then my ArcGIS Legend Maps component. And the way this is working is it's using the reference element to get my map and basically configure itself based on that map. So that's how it's showing the legend there. And so that's pretty much it. That's a small amount of code just to get a simple app going. And then if I go into the logic for toggling mode, I can go into that real quick. So I have these two links in my document, both for the Esri theme light and dark. And then I get a reference to those by document get element by ID. Then I get a reference to my toggle button. And when that toggle button is clicked, I'm going to see if the Calcite mode dark is already on the body. And if it is or if it isn't, I'm just going to flip it. And then that way I can toggle one of the style sheets on and off. And then I go through change the base map on the map as well. So I get a reference to the the map, and then I swap its base map from a light to a dark base map. So when I change this, it actually is changing the base map as well. And it's changing the icon on this button from the brightness to the moon. And lastly, I go through the document and see if there's any Calcite mode light or Calcite mode dark classes, and I just flip them. Because there actually is one inside of the maps component. And so if you want to switch from light to dark mode, you need to toggle that one too. And so this just toggles all of them just to be safe. So yeah, really simple app, but kind of shows you how you can use map components and Calcite Design System to create it. So here I have the same map, but I've expanded upon it a little bit. So inside the map, I have the search component now. I have a action using the placement component, and then that action opens up a popover, which inside of it has the base map gallery. And then I've thrown in an action bar into this starting panel now. And what that does is it allows me to toggle between these Calcite panels of layers and also show the layer component, layer list component, and then the bookmarks component. And then I have a dialog that shows the information that comes from the ArcGIS Online web map. So here it gets the title and the snippet from the web map and displays it there. And also have a toggle button to show a feature table component here at the bottom. So a little bit more going on there. And because now I'm showing more panels, we need to also think about responsive design. So let me kind of walk through the code a little bit here. We've already seen the navigation and the toggling. Here's my action bar where I have these actions right here for toggling between legend, layers, bookmarks. And then I also have an action group here to toggle the dialog as well as the table. And you can see I'm setting all the icons for these so they show up here. Then I have my panels. So here's my legend panel. Here's my layers panel. And inside the legend, I have my ArcGIS legend component with a reference to my map. And inside the layers one, I have ArcGIS layer list component with a reference to my map. And as well as the bookmarks one, I have a ArcGIS bookmarks component with a reference to my map. So that's pretty much how they're set up, super simple like that. Then what I do to get this toggling functionality going is I get all of my panels, get a reference to them, and I get all of my actions, and I query them by a data attribute to toggle a panel. And so for each of my panel actions, I go through them and I add a click event listener so that when they're clicked, it's going to get that data attribute and then figure out which panel inside this primary panel is going to need to be toggled on and off. And it also sets the active property on the action so that it's highlighted there. So that's what it's doing. It's toggling the active state and the action. And then for each of these panels, I'm either going to set it open or close it and hide it. And then when the primary panel is closed, I also want to listen for this Calcite panel event for Calcite panel close. And so when this panel is closed, I also want to collapse and close the shell panel. So I'm listening to a Calcite event here and then closing that Calcite shell panel. Then I have a secondary panel here on the right. So when I click a feature, now it's going to open up on the right instead of a pop-up over the map. And to do this, I'm using the features component. So I've created another shell panel, placed it on the end of my app, and inside that I have an ArcGIS features component. And to set that up, I basically just query to get the ArcGIS features component, and then I add I get a reference to the map as well, and I add an event listener for ArcGIS view click. So when the view is clicked, I get that map point from the event, and then I open the ArcGIS features component with that location, and I tell it to fetch the features out of that location. So that's how it knows which feature to give me and show me here. Also, for the ArcGIS features, I added an event listener for any time that the property change event happens. I want to check that event to see if the name of that detail is selected feature. So basically what this gives me is if I click somewhere on the view that doesn't have a feature that's returned to me, I can close that panel. But if I click somewhere that does, it'll open it. So it can close any open shell panels, and then it'll either collapse or expand this shell panel on the right here based on if there is a selected feature from the ArcGIS features widget. And then the same kind of logic that I did for this panel, if I close this one, it's going to collapse that shell panel as well. And then lastly, I have the shell panel for the feature table at the bottom. Kind of the same thing. I create the component here, give it a reference to my map. And then I get a reference to the feature table component and the map. So here's a map and there's a feature table. And then I added an event listener for the map. And when it's ready, I'm going to get that map and I'm going to find the layer I want to use within that map to add to the ArcGIS feature table as its layer. And then I set the ArcGIS feature table's view to the map. And then I set the ArcGIS feature table's filter geometry to be the map's extent. So that way it only queries features that are within my current extent. And then if I move the view to a different area, what I do is I add another event listener to listen for the view change. And then I'll just update that filter geometry to whatever the view extent is now. And then I have my toggle button for toggling the feature table here. So when I click it, it's going to basically just either collapse or expand this panel down here and set that button to active. And then here's my popover for the base map gallery. So you can see here, I have my popover with a reference element to the action that's going to use it. And then I have my Calcite panel. And inside of that, I have an ArcGIS base map gallery with a reference to my map. And then inside of my map, I'm placing the ArcGIS search component. And I'm using that placement component to place the base map gallery action at the top left. So this action, because it has the ID of base map action, will trigger this popover because its reference element references that ID. And then I have my dialog, which I'm showing the content from the web map. So this just gets populated whenever the map is ready. So I can come down here and I get a reference to my dialog. And so when it's clicked, it basically opens it. And then I get a reference to the item snippet HTML element, where I'm going to put the snippet in and the thumbnail and the URL and the title. And then when my map is ready, when the ArcGIS ready view change happens, I'm just going to get the title, snippet, item page URL, thumbnail URL from my map's portal item and just set it on those elements. So it's basically set up and configured from the web map and just populated into the HTML here. Cool. So the one thing that's kind of missing here is responsiveness. So I want to go and show this locally so I can show you what I did for that. So by default, you can open up the side panels, and you'll have the search and maybe the base map gallery open as well. We want this to be responsive, so when we go down to a smaller size, when we cross the 768 pixel size, we want to reduce things down. So the way I'm handling that is basically reducing the size of the search. I also modify the size of the base map gallery to only show one column now. And then I can only have one panel open at a time now in this view. So it'll only open up one and show one, so things aren't going to conflict with each other. Same thing with the table here. The dialog actually is already responsive by Calcite, so I don't need to do anything there. It's either going to adapt to the full screen or show in the centered. But yeah, and I also modified the heading description here. So if I cross that threshold, it kind of collapses that down a little bit just to give a little more room, because you might get down to this 375 pixel if you're on a phone device. So yeah, just a couple little things you can do to make things responsive. So the code for that is basically setting up a media query. And I'm basically saying, let me know when the size gets below 768 pixels. And I can test that and say, okay, if it does, I'm going to collapse all my panels and make sure that the buttons associated with those are not set to active anymore. And so anytime this media query changes, I can basically get a reference to my shell and my logo and kind of update their heading and description to make them a little shorter if I need to. I can collapse the action bar, and I can also offset the map padding so that these panels actually go underneath the map, and I shift this action over. So when When it's in the small mode, these panels will go over the map. When it's not, it'll push the map out. So just a little responsive work you could do. You could also throw content into a sheet or do things like that so that it's moving components around in different places. The last example I wanted to show is kind of a different approach to organizing your content. Maybe I don't want to have the search over the map. Maybe I want to put it in a block inside the panel. Maybe I want to have a horizontal action bar to kind of have quick actions to save or share this app. Maybe I want the action bar on the right side here to be in the dark mode by default. You can do that. And even when I toggle it, it'll flip to the light mode. And then instead of opening and closing panels, maybe I want to drill into this information. So I can drill into my legend, go back, get my layers, bookmarks. And then maybe I want to change base map just simply by using some chips. So those are all kind of things you could do. Also, here's an example of the sheet. Maybe I want to throw some navigation in there. And then kind of lastly, maybe I want to theme this. So I do have one style here to adjust the menu item background color for in the sheet. So it kind of matches this background color. And then I've also adjusted the navigation logo up here to use the brand color for the icon and this text below. So you see that there. I could also totally theme this using these design token variables. So if I uncomment those, now my app's in a totally different theme, both dark and light mode. And I'm not a designer, so I don't know if this looks that great. It probably doesn't, but just kind of proof of concept to where you can kind of change the whole theme. You may want to go more into not just colors, but changing spacing and rounded corners and all that stuff. But super easy to do, just basically changing CSS variables in both light and dark mode, or if you're just using light, just do light. Cool. So that's kind of building the user experience for your app and also kind of theming. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan. He's going to talk about more map-centric UX approaches.
All right, cool. Thanks, Matt. So now I'm going to be talking through a couple more layout examples. I'm going to be talking through a map-centric example and a non-map-centric example. So map-centric, pretty standard approach. You've probably seen this before. The app here, I have a map of the museums in the United States. I'll have bookmarks and a legend on the top right. And on the bottom left here, you'll notice that I have another component here on the bottom left with some chart components. And it's also using the carousel component from Calcite. So here's a carousel component. If I page through the different components, you'll see that there's a second chart and a third chart. So when I was mentioning the chart components earlier, I was talking about how you can access chart data directly from the web map, from a feature layer, and that's what this app is doing here. And on the very top, you'll notice that there's a header similar to the header experience that Matt set up. So it'll have a top left button to open up a sheet for any external items you'd want to redirect the end user to. On the top right, I have a couple actions by using action pad and actions. This opens up a dialog as a modal, and this button is going to be toggling the layout. And I'll toggle the layout in just a moment once we get to the non-map-centric sample. But let's talk a little bit about the code and how I got the map-centric layout set up. In the header tag here, I have a few links and script tags, so referencing some CDNs. So at the very top, I'll have some common styles that are shared between the map-centric and the non-map-centric layouts. I have styles specifically for the map-centric, but then you'll notice I'll have some CDNs here. So I have a CDN for Calcite. I have the style sheet for the core API. I have a CDN for the Maps SDK for JavaScript. And then below that, I'll have links to script tags for the map components and also the chart components. So I'm just going to minimize that. And in the body tag, pretty standard. So I have the Calcite shell. Within the shell, I have ArcGIS Map with an ID of ArcGIS Map. I got the item ID. I got the home and zoom buttons on the top left. And then I'll have the bookmarks and the legend on the top right here. And on the bottom, let's see. On this expand here on the bottom left, this is where I'm using the ArcGIS placement component. So here's the expand. I'm setting an icon of graph bar, positioning on the bottom left. And inside of the placement tag, I'm using the carousel. So in this carousel, I have 3 carousel items. And each carousel item is a container for each of the different charts here. And for the charts, I'm using the ArcGIS chart component. And the ArcGIS chart component, once you pass in the data into the chart component, it'll use the chart component object or the chart object to determine what chart series to use, whether it's going to be a scatter plot, a box plot, histograms. Once you pass on the object, the chart component will do that behind the scenes and render out the correct chart for you. So now let's talk through the common JavaScript that's used between both of the layouts. So at the very top, I have 3 different imports. I'm importing some HTML for the nav, for the sheet, and for the dialog. So here's the nav. It's using a Calcite navigation, Calcite logo, has the action pad and the actions for toggling the layout as well as the dialog, and also some Calcite tooltips here. So the next thing will be the sheet. This is using the Calcite sheet as a Calcite sheet for the pop-up menu for the different external links here. So inside here I have the Calcite menu items for external links here, and a notice at the bottom. And here is the dialog. So the dialog and that can be toggled on the top right. So Calcite dialog using the modal attribute, and there I'm using like notices and just some sample content here. So with those imports, once the common class is instantiated in the constructor, I'm initializing the app, and initializing is determining whether this is the map-centric or the non-map-centric layout. And I have a method here that creates and inserts the elements. So the different HTML that I just showed just a couple moments ago, I have a method here that will create and insert the dialog element, the sheet element, and the nav element. So after I initialize, I'm getting some references to the different DOM nodes. So that would be the map, the sheet, the nav, etc. And also the nodes or the buttons to toggle on, like the dialog and toggling the layout. So once I have references to the node, I'm going to be setting up the UI. And the UI is just setting up some event listeners here. I have a method in my common.js file to add event listeners. And this is just simply passing in references to the nodes, the event name, and the callback methods. So I'm toggling the sheets and the layout and the dialog by using these different event names. So Calcite navigation action select to toggle the sheet, toggle dialog node, listening for the click event to toggle the dialog. So once I have all the event listeners set up, then I'll initialize some of the map components. And in init map components, this is where the chart setup would be. So in reference to the map, I'm adding an event listener, ArcGIS view ready change. This lets me know that the map view is ready. Once the map view is ready, I'll grab the chart layer within the web map. So I'm going view map all layers, finding it by this ID here. Once I have the chart layer, I'm setting up the charts. And lastly, in setup charts, I'm loading up the layer. Here I just have an array of objects. Each ID is pertaining to the ID of the chart node within the HTML. And the index is the index of the chart within the chart's data in the layer. So I'm iterating through the chart data. In here, I'm getting the chart node by its ID. I'm grabbing the chart of the chart that I want to render out in the UI. So I'm using the index here. I'm using the chart titles content text to set the heading of the panel. So that's how these titles are being set here within the chart. So if I go to the second one, you'll see that the correct title is being used. So since I'm setting the title on the panel, I'm setting the title visible to false, so it's not rendering on the chart component itself. And for demo purposes, I'm setting the legend visible to false just to save up some real estate. So that's how I got the map-centric layout set up. So if you wanted to take some further customizations with your user experience and not use like a map-centric approach, here's how here's a different approach on a non-map-centric layout. So it's using the same header here, but now you'll see that the bookmarks are on the top left. You have the map in the center at the top row and the legend on the top right. And below, I'm rendering all charts at the same time at the bottom row here. So I mentioned earlier that this common.js file is being used between both layouts, so both the map-centric and non-map-centric layouts. And just to quickly show what the HTML looks like, so the head will be the same. So in the body, I'm using the Calcite shell. In here, I have a Calcite panel. And the main thing to point out here is that I'm using a grid container. Within the CSS, I'm setting the display to grid. And each of these different panels is a representation of each panel in the layout. So I have a panel for the bookmarks, for the map, for the legend, and for the 3 different charts here. And if we take a look at the CSS, in the grid container, I'm setting some margins here, setting the height, setting display to grid, setting the styles for the columns and the rows. And in the template areas, I have bookmarks, map, legend, and charts 1, 2, and 3 as represented on the layout on the right-hand side. And some more additional stylings to get the grid properly set up. And the last thing I wanted to show is mobile responsive. I wanted to make sure that these layouts were also mobile responsive as well. So if I open up my dev tools, in the non-map-centric layout, I have the different panels stacked one on top of another. So I have your map, your bookmarks, your legend, your 3 different charts. And then here is the CSS that's needed to make this mobile responsive. So I'm targeting the grid container, setting the template columns to 1 FR. And then the template areas stacking the different panels, so map, bookmarks, legend, and charts 1, 2, and 3. And if I toggle over to the map-centric layout, all the tools will be collapsed. But if I open up the different panels, it'll open up as a sheet on the bottom here. And same thing with the legend, as well as the charts here. Cool. So those are the different app examples that we have set up. And here are some resources that you want to access. So there's documentation for Calcite, the Maps SDK, and also different blog posts and all that. And if you can, please share feedback through the app. We use the feedback to improve our presentations and our sessions in future conferences. And if you connect, and here's some handles that you can connect with us on socials. And now we'll leave it at questions.
Do we have any online questions, Julie?
Yep, there's a question online. So this is for you, Ryan. Why use div wrapper instead of ArcGIS placement for non-centric sample?
Okay, so for the ArcGIS placement, so as mentioned earlier, so if you want to render out some custom UI that's not a pre-built map component, then you'd have to use something like the ArcGIS placement. In the ArcGIS placement, when you want to render out, like, say, a carousel, or even just like your own div with your own custom UI, you'll need to set it in placement so you'll be able to properly render out the UI. If you just use a div within an expand, then the node element wouldn't properly render. So placement handles all that behind the scenes. So you'd use that as the parent and nest in your custom UI.
Okay, another question from online. Well, they definitely want your apps.
Yep.
Did you share that on the...
Yeah, we have the links, and they'll be in the proceedings on the slides when we have them. But
Okay, cool.
yeah, we have the links in there.
Okay, so yes, go to recent proceedings after the conference. Another question, I did answer it, but maybe others might be curious. where does the charts JSON object come from? How is it created and published?
Yep. Yeah. So for that particular example that I showed today, the chart data comes directly from the feature layer, and that feature layer is saved in the web map. So once you have that web map ID available, you can set that to your app, have your app point to it, and your app will be able to access that chart data. If you want to author your own charts, you can do that directly in Map Viewer. You can just so you can go into the Map Viewer, select which layer you want to author that chart in, author your chart, and that'll be stored in the web map. So your app will have access to it.
Okay, I feel like the three of us will have a different answer for this. Here's the question.
Okay.
Could the apps you demoed be built in Experience Builder? What are Experience Builder's limitations? How do I determine which to use, Experience Builder or the SDK? Do you want to answer or do you want help?
I want you to answer that.
Okay. So I think you could technically build something similar to what these guys made, the Experience Builder. There's many considerations. One is, Experience Builder comes with a whole app framework that's prepared so that you can really focus your effort on building a custom widget. If you're creating a simple app and you're trying to create something very focused, I think the SDK and Calcite's are really a great way to go. I mean, I'm also not the product manager for Experience Builder, so you might get some different answers. But if you're looking for a way to, create a single widget and you want to deploy it, or maybe you're even creating one that you want to share with another organization that's going to build their own app using the Experience Builder UI, you can take that approach. But I think for focused applications, the SDK in Calcite is now a really great option for writing minimal code, creating focused apps, and kind of creating it exactly the way you want. So I think they're all good options, and also instant apps should also be considered for scenarios where there's already a great app that's been created for a particular scenario. So you should definitely look at everything available before you build a new app and dashboards. And make the best choice for the scenario. And Experience Builder also is not based on Calcite, so when I said that you could do something similar, that's why I was saying similar, because it has its kind of own design elements and components that isn't not very heavily based on Calcite. There's a little bit of Calcite, but it's not really Calcite based. So that's that. And I think everyone at Esri kind of has a different perspective on that, because it really is just a choice based on what you're trying to build. Okay, another question. Is there any way to use web components in a native experience? I'm thinking it'd be great to use these in React Native or something similar.
Well, I think React has its own component system, right? So, but you could use these components in React. So essentially, yeah, you could. Yeah.
Well, it's a little different though. So Fred might have a better answer for this. They're not really meant for native. Or you could just take Fred's answer. He's just doing, no. They're not, React Native's not the same as like the React wrapper and stuff that we've got for web. Oh, a question over here? You don't need it right now?
No, you don't need it with version 19. Version 18, you don't need it, but it's definitely helpful. It makes it life easier. Yeah. Mostly eventing issues. Yeah.
I believe React 19 fully supports web components out of the box. So it would be good to update to React 19 whenever you can. I believe in React 18, that's why there were the wrappers available and all that to handle all the event system. So.
Yeah, if you're using React 19, you don't need the Calcite React anymore.
Was there another question over there? No, okay. How do we recreate the arrow that is in the sketch widget and its rotation without customization? I don't know. Do you know what that's
What
about?
was the question again?
how do we recreate the arrow that is in a sketch widget and its rotation without customization? I don't know of an arrow in the sketch widget, do you?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're
Yeah,
referring to.
if you want to restate the question, then please do that online. Is there any other questions in the audience? Oh, yep, up front.
In the Calcite Design token up there, where you can specify what you want for dark and light mode, can you export that?
Yeah, so I mean, the tokens are available in JSON, CSS, SAS. So yeah, you can use any one of those. For it to affect Calcite, it needs to be in CSS, but those token variables are available in different languages. Oh, sorry, repeat the question was, I mentioned the design tokens in Calcite Design System, and the question was whether or not they can be exported, right?
Well, it was from the docs.
From the docs.
You can change them in the documentation for light and dark mode, export that out to the format.
Yeah, so a better source for that would be from the Calcite Design System repository on GitHub to get the token values, and they're available in JSON, SAS, CSS. So yeah, I don't think there's an export from the documentation for those tokens. You can see all of them, and you can easily copy them, but I'm not sure there's an export from that. But that's a good suggestion. Thanks.
Yep.
You said that the hold on the Calcite right now, but will the component change the future?
So my understanding is that that's a long-term goal to be based on Calcite. It's not very clear because it is long-term, but there's many requests. Every conference we get that request to have the ability to integrate Calcite and have a Calcite or have an Experience Builder theme that's fully based on Calcite. There's definitely interest in integrating Calcite and also on the Experience Builder team side, but there's several priorities that are being focused on first. Yeah. Not anytime soon, I guess is the right answer, but I do know that they have increased how much they've used, but it's really, they almost have their own kind of design system inside Experience Builder.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm hearing another, does Calcite, you know if that's extensible to Calcite?
So the question was about the web editor, if that's extensible to Calcite. Julie, do you know?
No, web editor's not extensible. You're talking about the hosted web editor, that application that's in online, right? You're not talking about the editor component.
The web editor that's kind of replacing that, if users want to talk about web editing with a web experience,
Yeah, so web editor is a purely user application, but it's being built using the JavaScript SDK components. So you could build an app that uses the editor component, uses the various capabilities that you see in web editor. They're really just creating an experience around it. The way that we're doing development with editing is we release the editing functionality, new editing functionality in web editor first, and then it comes over to the JavaScript SDK. But you could, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking to do, but if you're looking to create a sophisticated editing app, you could do that with SDK. If you have a specific question, you can come over and ask after. Oh, okay, yeah. Anything else? Okay, great job,
All right,
guys.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.